I get to the office between 6:30 and 6:45 with a fire in my belly as to what contribution are we going to make. South Africans do not realize the bequest that they have. It's in the best interest of South Africa to remain friends with as many people as possible as Africa takes its rightful place.
Absolutely.
In the community of continents.
So true.
This is the African century.
Welcome to In This Economy with SMWX and Standard Bank Private, where we unpack the forces driving South Africa's future, one conversation at a time. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX and In This Economy. And today I'm extremely excited and honored to be joined by Group CEO of Standard Bank, none other than Mr. Tshabalala. So thank you so much for joining us.
Dr. Sizwe, thank you very much. It's a real privilege. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for the privilege. And also thank you for the good work that you do.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be with you. Fun fact, we actually went to the same school.
Yes, and we came out all right.
So far, so good.
It's wonderful, and we share so many values together, so it's great, and I'm sure we'll touch on them as we discuss the topics you want to tease out.
Absolutely. What did you learn from that particular moment in your life that you've carried forward into this important position that you hold?
I mean, there are many things, but having gone to a Catholic school, as you have, you learn a deep reverence and love for humanity. And I believe that banking is fundamentally a humane endeavor. It's about creating prosperity and providing people with the products and services that they need in order to live. So you lend money to somebody to purchase a fridge that contributes to their health. Somebody borrows to buy a home that provides shelter. A government or a state-owned entity borrows to build a port so that you can export the goods and products of the nation. And in that sense, then you are contributing to prosperity. And I think that was a big takeout. I think the second one is just the notion of heroic leadership, that you need to aim for something greater than yourself. In the case of Standard Bank, that's our purpose. Africa is our home, we drive her growth. That you need to know thyself. The inscription at the Oracle of Delphi, know thyself, and then in order to be yourself. And if you recall, there's a second inscription there that says, nothing in excess. Live within your means, don't be excessive, no false modesty, but also don't be excessive. And be organized, have a plan. So have a purpose, a vision, but also have a plan, write it down, check on yourself from time to time, focus on prayer, but don't just focus on prayer and do something about changing the environment so that you achieve your objectives. And so, that sense of the importance of humanity and the importance of leadership.
You're quite the philosophy buff, actually. I was listening to some of your previous interviews and you were quoting Summa Theologica, and I was like, wow, that's really interesting, both the banking and legal aspect, but also you have quite an interest in philosophy. So
first of all, I'm not surprised that you have a PhD. You're a smart guy. So thank you. And that compliment I take. Look, again, having been through an environment that focuses very much on the importance of learning and education, for me, that is important for productivity, and it's an issue I think you and I will be debating a little bit later. It's very, very important to wonder about the world. At school, they used to say to wonder and to worry. And I've always wondered and worried. And it's an important part, therefore, of leadership and leading in a bank. Summa Theologica, Summa Contra Gentiles by St. Thomas Aquinas, fundamental to understanding natural laws, and again, fundamental to how I think about life as well. That the world is animated by reason, and that you need to constantly ask yourself, what is the logic behind what is happening and what will the outcome be? And for those of us who are people of faith, you reckon that God is the primum mobile, or is the animator of all of those things. And you ought to try and understand that logic and therefore a natural law. So it's not philosophy for philosophy's sake. It's for, doing something about these impacts on humanity, understanding why particular economic trends happen, try and do your best to contribute to them. To wonder and to worry.
Your journey into this important office is a fascinating one, and it started with the law, and then you shifted over into banking. Talk us through that important shift in your own life and how it's come to have an important role in the history of this firm and group.
So I joined the group in 2000. And prior to that, I'd been working for a investment bank called Real Africa Duralink, which, if you recall, was owned by Real Africa, which in turn was owned and controlled by a consortium led by Don Ncube. And I mentioned that because I had the privilege of sitting in the front row of the execution of Black economic empowerment, and saw the good, the bad, and the ugly associated with these processes. I have to emphasize that from my perspective, there's much more good, there's a little bit of bad, and much less ugly.
Sure.
But we are humans, and we can talk about what I mean by all of that. I learned in that process that I was not an entrepreneur, but could be an intrapreneur. I decided that I was an institution person. I preferred to work in an institution and make a difference in an institution. And at that time, Standard Bank was it. It matched my own vision of the future, my own values, and just a deep belief in the possibilities of the African continent. And when Jacko Marie and Ben Kruger and David Munro at the time spoke to me, the vision that they painted about this institution matched my own. And I have to tell you, and I make no apologies for it, I believe in the importance of this institution, the role that it plays, and its purpose. And if you recall, the purpose of Standard Bank is Africa is our home, we drive our growth. I wake up every morning and I get to the office between 6:30 and 6:45 with a fire in my belly as to what contribution are we going to make, what difference are we going to make. And it feels a little bit like a calling to be doing that. Working for an institution that is 163 years old with this fantastic purpose is a real privilege. And I'm able as an individual to say what this organization stands for and what it's trying to achieve is entirely aligned with what I believe in, what I'm trying to achieve. And so it's a real privilege to be able to do that. I've just come back from Zambia. If I could just tell you that little story.
Of course.
And I jumped onto SAA on Monday morning. And what a beautiful experience. SAA, the flight was full. The service on that aircraft was absolutely fantastic. We got to Lusaka, and we got to the airport is pretty new. I hadn't been to Lusaka since just before COVID. And the airport was new. It was fantastic. It was bustling. Attended a series of meetings with colleagues and was just inspired by what is happening there. I might just add that our business there is called Stanbic, but it's one of our 20 subsidiaries on the African continent. It makes 1.2 billion rand in profits, return on equity of roughly 42%. It employs a vast number of people and is an important contributor to the economy of Zambia. A little cameo at dinner the Monday, we had the ambassador join us, the South African ambassador. We had the central bank also participate, and it was together with our team in Zambia plus the chairman of all our subsidiaries, because we're having a series of meetings there with our chairman. And so what does that tell you? It tells you here's an institution run by Africans, representing the best, if I may humbly say so, of Africa's banking leadership, having deep conversations about the difference we make in Lusaka. And the ambassador spoke to me about Oliver Tambo House in Lusaka. And so, summary, we flew from South Africa on SAA, the connection between South Africa and Zambia. We enjoyed great service on the aeroplane, the connectivity between the two nations, trade, tourism. You can think about all those things associated then with the movement of goods, people, capital, ideas, and that link. Just one last piece that was really fascinating, which links to this, how fantastic it is to work for Standard Bank. At dinner on Tuesday night, Nguni group of dancers danced for us. Why is that significant? There's a big Ngoni community in Zambia, likewise in Zimbabwe, likewise in South Africa. You can see then the bridges, the cultural connections, not just the economic connections, but the cultural connections between South Africa, Zimbabwe, and indeed Zambia. And that's working at Standard Bank. If that doesn't make you want to work for Standard Bank, I give up, Dr.
It's inspiring to the extent that, in preparation for this, as a South African, we have a certain relationship with the bank as a South African institution.
Indeed.
But you don't actually appreciate the full scale of the bank across the continent at a very important moment for the continent's history as Africa embarks on a new growth trajectory.
And no. As Africa takes its rightful place
absolutely
in the community of continents.
So true. So true.
This is the African century.
For sure. And you're at the center of building that, the enterprises, the infrastructure, the trade links that integrate the continent.
Exactly right. So yes, we employ 54,000 people at Standard Bank.
Wow.
Yeah, about 30,000 of those are here in South Africa. The rest are in 19 other countries. Secondly, we have assets of over 2 trillion rand.
Sheesh.
That's in loans and advances. And then we've got assets under management in insurance and asset management of over 1 trillion rand as well, which makes Standard Bank, as a group on the continent, the largest financial institution holding in trust and in custody societies' deposits, savings, and so forth. We play a fundamental role in allowing people to have access to financial services. It's often said that you cannot operate as an economic agent unless you have a bank account. And so we bank roughly 20 million people in this network. We play an important role, as I said, in the movement of goods, people, ideas, and capital through this network. South Africa is supposed to grow, we think, by roughly 1.3% this year. We'd originally projected or planned on 1.7%, but our economists have revised that to 1.3%. Given what is happening in the globe at the moment, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about.
Sure.
And the rest of the operations outside South Africa, we thought would grow at roughly 4.5%. The IMF reckons that the continent will grow at 4%. So that's the whole continent.
Sure.
And as that happens, more and more people are going to be entering the financial system, the banking system. They're going to be becoming more, holding more phones. They will have more access to the internet, and therefore we'll be able to provide them with banking services through our app, and therefore there will be greater penetration. Now, I mention that because a bank grows on the basis of growth in the economy, GDP growth. That's why I made reference to the 1.3% and the 4.5%.
Sure.
So GDP growth. The continent in that context is the second fastest growing continent in the world. By 2030, we reckon it'll be growing faster than the rest of the world.
Wow.
As Africans get healthier, wealthier, more productive, They will need more products and services, and we are positioned as a financial institution to do that for them. And then the second aspect of that growth is banking penetration. As more and more people have bank accounts, as they transact more, that's how you, as an institution, grow. We are well positioned to do that because of these 20 operations that I was talking about, the chairman of which were meeting in Zambia. That's why I told you that little story about us meeting in Lusaka, flying to Lusaka on SAA, the importance, therefore, of that state-owned entity. South Africa there playing an important role in facilitating this movement of goods, people, and ideas, and Standard Bank supportive of that through either transacting with and providing services to the likes of SAA or the clients in Zambia that I was referring to.
One of the interesting things about your leadership of the bank is, of course, there's, shall we say, the sexy aspects of investment banking and all of that, but you've placed a lot of focus on PPB, what a bank means to an actual person who's trying to
buy a fridge,
absolutely
or
get to that next level of wealth.
That's it. Yeah.
Talk us through the importance of what a bank just means to one generation trying to make it to the next generation.
So, Dr. Sizwe, it's fundamental to think that, again, to be economically active, you need a bank account. So that's the entry point. Secondly, all of us aspire to gaining assets. So we borrow to buy that house and that car to make us productive as we go to work. If we are owners of a business and we're in logistics, the bank lends us money to buy a truck. But we're doing that for many, many reasons. But an important part of that is we're trying to create wealth for ourselves, create prosperity for ourselves. And then if we are fortunate enough to have been able to build assets, to then leave those assets for future generations. So our job as a bank in that context is to facilitate people's entry into the financial system, banking system, current accounts, savings accounts, MIMO, which I know that you hold. You're nodding. I know you're lying. You don't have. It doesn't have a MIMO account. But I'm teasing you. I mean, you could be holding one from our competitors, which is okay, by the way. And it's something that we can come back to. Just the importance of competition.
Sure.
My point is,
no comment.
We facilitate people entering the financial system. Then we help them acquire those assets. We help them build their wealth, and hopefully we help them pass that wealth on to their future generations. We help them with wills. With estate planning, help them make sure that they structure their finances such that they pass them on to future generations. One issue which I think is of importance for people like you and I, which we need to really talk honestly about, is the fact that savings are so important and that South Africans do not save enough, both as individuals, you and I as individuals, as communities and as a nation. And it's fundamental. One of the main reasons the East Asian tigers do so well is because they save so much. And it is important for us to talk about this openly and honestly, to say, we must learn to live within our means. And it differs, I suppose, from individual to individual, but it's a fundamental. Live within our means, put away a bit, enjoy life, but put away a bit, and build on that. As a friend of mine often says, "Utye ubeka," as they say, as opposed to excessive spending, living beyond your means and so forth. So just to emphasize, it is so important to save. And as a nation, we do not save enough.
It's really interesting. One of the things that stuck with me that was actually said on this show by one of our other guests was, we spend a lot of time talking about unemployment and the need for employment, which is no doubt important in our context. But actually, what we need as a country and as a continent is to build wealth, not just giving people enough money in employment to make it, to the next day, but to build that wealth so it can be transferred, even in small amounts, to the next generation.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that is so fundamental. I mean, you've taken the words out of my mouth.
Can I ask you about the South African situation? We've got a fascinating moment in our country's history where a government of national unity has come together across different political divides, in particular to try and grow the economy and put us on a sound financial position. And of course, as a bank, you operate within that environment. It's an economic environment, and it has political implications. What is your assessment so far of, this new political reality, and what is it that South Africa needs to do in this moment to chart a positive economic future?
Absolutely. So let me start by dealing with categories. Again, you got me talking about St. Thomas Aquinas. And just think carefully about the social division of labor. What is the role of a financial institution or a business in a complex geopolitical environment and political environment in the country? Is it my job as the CEO of Standard Bank to weigh in on politics? I would say to you, no.
Sure.
There are people better qualified and appropriately mandated to do that in the nature of political parties, organs of civil society, and so forth. So that's a very important point to make. And I mean that sincerely, and I insist on it. You can ask any of my colleagues that it's not our job to be political. And in fact, I bet you don't know what my personal politics are.
Yeah, that's quite right.
And you can guess all you like. I will not answer your question. And it's very important to do that because I am absolutely adamant that the job of this institution is to contribute to prosperity, not to play in the political arena. So that's the one fundamental point.
Sure.
The next one, of course, is that, but for you to be able to sell your products and goods and for you to create prosperity, you need the appropriate policy environment. And for the country to become more competitive, we need to become more productive. For us to be more productive, what do we need? We need better education, better health. So the soft and hard infrastructure necessary to make it possible for people to go to school, get a good education so that they can get better jobs. What do we mean by productivity? Productivity is the output that a worker produces. Sadly, it's a true statement of fact that our productivity is not as high as it ought to be, not as high as it should be, given the competitiveness of the nation, the need for South Africa to compete. That is important, Dr. Sizwe, because we compete for resources. In financial terms, we compete with many other parts of the world for capital, and we need the capital to finance our infrastructure and so forth. So our competitiveness, our productivity is so important. So what would I be advocating for? I'd be advocating for improved ease of doing business, the improvement of our institutions, and importantly, you will not be surprised to hear, I would be saying the bedrock of all of this is the rule of law. It is fundamental to the sanctity of contract. It is important for people to be certain that if they enter into a deal, whether it be by way of a handshake or a signed contract, each party will meet their obligations when the time comes for them to meet them. And it's important from a banking perspective that if we lend you money, you will pay it back when it's due. Just like when you've put a deposit into Standard Bank, you're expecting the deposit to be paid back. The question then becomes, does the current arrangement in the country make it possible for us to create prosperity? I would say to you, well, what do we need for that purpose? Well, we need structural reforms. We need structural reforms in the area of energy, logistics, the telco system, water, sanitation, the municipalities, and we need an improvement in the safety and security of our environment. Well, when I read Operation Vulindlela and the projects being executed in that context, they tick all 7 of those categories that I just referred to. And so that's what the country needs. That's what the country is doing. Is it probable and is it likely that under the GNU that's what will be achieved? Well, when I look at the contract entered into by the members of the GNU and their program, that's what they're aiming to do. Is it therefore consistent with creating prosperity? Yes. Were they to change that program, were they to, for example, let's say jettison issues around fiscal rectitude and fiscal consolidation, I would put my hand up and say, but is not in the best interest of creating prosperity, because if our debt to GDP ratio goes above 72%, as is currently projected, and goes to 80%, will we be able to meet our obligations as a country? The answer would be no. So I would advocate for us sticking to that fiscal consolidation. I would submit that that is consistent with what you hear the politicians saying. Should they be supported in that direction? Yes. If they were to deviate from that, would it make it more difficult to create prosperity? The answer would be yes.
Sure. I mean, one of the things, because we're such a loud and cacophonous country.
No. We are an Athenian democracy, as in Athens, where we've got a great constitution, we've got a competitive political environment, and competition in this sense, in this context, is important because it creates better outcomes. The more competition, the better the outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And within that Athenian context, we're often focusing so much on the latest issue or the latest hope, but we often don't speak as much about just how much potential this economy has to be one of the great economies of the next century. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the potential of the South African economy to truly live up to what it can be?
Sure. I think the potential is vast. And hence, I think the sadness often, or the frustration with the missed opportunities. The potential is vast. Yeah. Again, let me talk to this trip to Zambia. Our colleagues in our network often say to us, South Africans do not realize the bequest that they have, the infrastructure. So the electricity grid, the electricity infrastructure, the logistics infrastructure, the institutions, the Department of Science and Technology is world class. The National Treasury is ranked second or third consistently over the last couple of decades for budget transparency. It is really something to celebrate. It is really, really world class. The central bank, the governor is ranked, is rated A. When many central banks in developed countries are rated A- and B. He's amongst the top central bank governors in the world. Our universities, University of UJ, WITS, UCT, are amongst the best academic institutions, research institutions in the world. Johannesburg and Cape Town are ranked amongst the best fintech hubs. They compare well with Berlin, Mumbai, Tel Aviv, New York, in terms of the capacity that is there, the relationship between the financial sector, the professions, the universities, and then generating great ideas and innovation in fintech. And these are things that ought to be nurtured, built upon, and accelerated. I said earlier on that we should rank higher on the global scene in terms of our competitiveness. We're currently, in the 50s. We should be in the top 20 or top 10. There's no reason why we shouldn't be. There are good things to speak to that I was referring to. We've got the resources, we've got the universities, we've got the business sector, we've got great government departments. There are some that are not great, but we've got some really, really good ones that need to be harnessed to be more productive so that we can be more competitive. But there are many things that drag us down. Our industrial policy could be better. We have deindustrialized as a country, which is why we've got a rust belt, for example, around the Vaal Triangle and around the Western Cape. We have got poverty and inequality that is not acceptable. We've got unemployment and an unemployment rate that is not acceptable. And these elements drag down our competitiveness. But we know what needs to be done. People like you speak about this and write about it. People know what they need to do to get us out there. So let me just summarize the point by saying this. South Africa needs to grow at above 3%. to address the issues around poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And before the trade wars, I would have been saying to you, we think that this year South Africa could grow at 3% as it executes its structural reforms. I think it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
My point to you is that it's actually possible for us to grow at above 3%. And off a base of over $400 billion, which is what our GDP is, growing at 3 to 4% is a game changer. And it answers that question that you're making, that from a banking, from a finance perspective, from a business perspective, it is possible for us to take our rightful place in the family of nations, to quote the preamble to the Constitution.
Absolutely. I mean, you've alluded to the global context.
Yeah.
Trade wars, tariffs on the rise for the first time in many decades. Are you concerned that this global environment is going to have spillover effects onto South Africa? And how do we mitigate as an economy against this uncertainty that seems to be growing both in the East and the West?
Dr. Souza, sadly, it already has. Many data points. I said to you at the start of our conversation that earlier this year, our economists were projecting growth of 1.7%. We revised it down to 1.3%, largely because of the real uncertainty that the world is facing at the moment. That's the first thing. The second one is we had hoped that inflation globally would be on the decline, and therefore interest rates would be cut, and therefore create greater, a disposable income for our clients. Sadly, that looks like inflation will remain higher for longer, therefore interest rates higher for longer, therefore pressure on consumers, sadly. Am I concerned? Yes, I am. Why? Well, we know what happens when tariff walls go up. There have been many examples in history. The period of deglobalization that we are seeing now, we saw it between the period between 1912 and 1945. The features are very, very similar. And it lasted, as I say, from 1912 to 1945. Have we seen a scenario where tariffs have gone up dramatically? And what was the impact? Well, we saw it with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1929, imposed by the United States. And it took a long time before they were reversed. But we also know that it gave rise to potentially the depression. However, I must just make this point that it is important to understand the logic that drives nations to push up tariffs. And it is arguable that high tariffs or tariffs together with the right industrial policies actually work. That's why countries often have tariffs.
Sure.
That's why South Africa has had tariffs. It's arguable, however, that the way they get imposed often gives rise to outcomes that are inconsistent with the principles that people were trying to drive at. Tariffs often come up, and people often argue for them when the manufacturing sector becomes less competitive and when you end up with rust belts. And again, I spoke about our own rust belts here in South Africa. It was fascinating, if I could just mention this, reading an article written by the president of COSATU. It was in the Star. It's on IOL. You can Google it. Where she analyzes I think she was writing in the context of your point around geopolitics, and what is happening and how South Africa ought to be positioning itself. And she made a point which was really striking, which is the logic, the intellectual logic around the tariffs, the logic being advanced in the United States is not dissimilar to the logic being advanced by the labor movement. You want to reduce the impact of negative externalities caused by globalization. You want to preserve jobs. You want to make sure that people are cushioned against the negative impacts of globalization if you accept globalization. And that logic is not unique to where the argument is being made in places like the United States. It's also important to remember that the logic being advanced in the US for tariffs is not new.
Sure.
It arises from the mercantilist approach since the 17th century. The intellectual logic that argues against it, by David Ricardo, Adam Smith, and so forth, is very clear about why it's not good. But the point to recognize is that there is a tradition, an intellectual tradition driving it. And let me just make this point also, geopolitics, but you now have increasingly the notion of geoeconomics, which is being advanced. And it's important for all of us to get to grips with these debates and understand them.
Absolutely.
But let me just end by making this point, that in this context, the competition between the US and China, should one be despondent about it? I'm saying no. We should think about the risks associated with it, plan for the worst. Where does it end up? Does it really get bad? And hope for the best, but look for opportunities. And there are vast opportunities that actually arise. Value chains and supply chains are going to change. What opportunities are there for Africa? Africa provides the world with the rare earth minerals, the copper, the cobalt, the manganese. South Africa continues to provide the world with the platinum group metals that the world needs for internal combustion engines. In that context, how do we position ourselves to take advantage of these dislocations? How do we negotiate the best bargains for South Africa and Africa in that context?
Yeah, absolutely. When the BRICS summit came to Johannesburg, we were in a very different global moment. But there was already talk about whether global power was shifting, if not in real terms, at least relatively, away from the United States as a key pole of global power. Do you think that global power has shifted, and is South Africa ready for that shift, such that we aren't dependent on either one or the other pole of that shift economically? Because some of the great economies right now have been able to, I think of India, for example, they've been able to balance their alliances across different parts of the world. And one would think in this era, that's something South Africa may well need to think quite hard about.
I do think that the world is definitely headed towards a multipolar world. And again, if you read literature coming out of the US, that is how the US thinks about it. And that is how other parts of the world think about it. That is how the Singaporeans, for example, think about it. And you correctly point out that that's how the Indians think about it. I do think that as a small, open economy, it's in the best interest of South Africa to remain friends with as many people as possible. And position its trade, its investments, its goods, its people, its capital to be in the service of as many people and as many partners as is possible. So strategic non-alignment, I think, is the language that often gets used, is fundamental in that context. You've got to be able to have good relationships with as many people as possible, sticking within the four corners of laws and regulations and global norms, and being fair. And I think the notion of fairness in this context is important, which takes me back to that article by the president of COSATU in the Star, talking about what is in the best interests of the labor movement in this case and what is fair. From a banker's perspective, it's to say, it's in our interest, regardless of what happens globally, it's in our interest for us to be able to facilitate payments globally. SWIFT is important to us. Your next question would be, in this dislocating world, does the dollar become irrelevant? I'm saying to you, no. The dollar is fundamental, purely as an economic fact, that it is the dominant reserve currency in the world. Payments for trade, for investment are happening in dollars. You therefore need to be able to be servicing your clients as they pay for either building the bridge or making a payment for a consignment of goods. And you've got to be able to serve your clients given that multipolar environment, but with an emphasis on constantly asking yourself, what is in the best economic interests of South Africa? Keep asking that as you interact with people.
Final question. What is the most rewarding thing about your role, and what is the most challenging thing? Well, maybe let's start with the most challenging and end with the most rewarding.
The most challenging is talking to the likes of Dr. Sizwe, who ask you tough questions. It's the task is really, really a privilege in that you have access to data, information, knowledge that is mind-blowing. You get to speak to the most interesting people. And again, the flight to Zambia again is just underscores that. Just the opportunity to have access to the people that were on the airplane and then talking to people in Lusaka. It's an absolute privilege. The challenge is trying to remain sane in a dizzyingly complex environment and trying to simplify ideas and concepts, make sense of them, facilitate the decision making that is necessary in that context. But the summary, Sizwe, is that it's just an absolute privilege to be in this position.
Well, Mr. Tshabalala, the privilege has been mine. Always great to see another Sacred Heart alumnus.
Oh, you're very kind.
And it's been a fascinating insight philosophically, geo-economically, and financially. So thank you for the great work that you do, the contribution you make to the country and the continent's economy. And I wish you all the best as you continue your important work.
Thank you, sir, and likewise. Thank you.
Thank you. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and join us for the next installment of In This Economy. Ayeye.